So I realise this title might seem a little extreme or hyperbolic, and I realise that, but I feel it is an appropriate title. I've been working on a research-based master's degree for a little over a year now, and I realise to some of you that might not seem like a long time, and to be fair, it really isn't. But there's something I've noticed in TV shows and movies and just the general grad school culture that I think we should talk about. But before we talk about grad school and research, we need to talk about art. The starving artist is a trope that's appeared in a variety of different media types over the years. Giacomo Puccini's opera, La Boheme, which was the inspiration for Rent, features a group of artists and musicians who are pursuing their creative dreams. Unfortunately, these dreams can't really sustain the group, and they're barely able to afford food, and they have to pawn off their belongings just to be able to survive. More recently, in SpongeBob Season 3, the episode Can You Spare a Dime features Squidward, and Squidward quits his job. He gets into an altercation with his boss, Mr. Krabs, and in an attempt to sustain himself, Squidward tries to make money selling his art. You see, Squidward is a creative individual. He plays the clarinet, he paints, he draws, and considers himself to be a bit of a sort of snob in that regard as well, I think. Selling art doesn't really go well for Squidward, and he ends up having to sustain himself by eating his art, so that he won't starve to death.
Oh, even your paintings?
Nobody would take them, so I had to eat them!
Now, if this were real, Squidward would most likely die on these underwater streets, or if he's very lucky, he would sell enough paintings to be able to buy himself one Krabby Patty every so often. But because this is a TV show, primarily aimed at children, the status quo must resume. And due to some wacky hijinks at the end of the episode, Squidward and Mr. Krabs, his boss, make up and he gets his job back, and none of this is addressed at all in the next episode. Doctor Who features an episode in the 5th season titled Vincent and the Doctor. It features the Doctor and his companion travelling to the past and meeting Vincent van Gogh, whose name I think I'm saying right. Upon meeting Vincent, they see him unable to afford drinks at a pub, being ridiculed by the staff there while he attempts to barter for a pint with one of his paintings. So, where has this trope come from? Where has this image of an artist going without food to pursue their passion come from? I think first we need to look at the word trope. So, Merriam-Webster defines a trope as a word or expression used in a figurative sense and a common or overused theme or device. The key part there is common or overused theme. The fact is that this is a common occurrence for many artists and creatives, especially in the past. I mentioned Vincent van Gogh a few moments ago, and in reality, Vincent used the very minute amount of money he made to buy art supplies and would sustain himself on coffee and alcohol. He felt that reaching out for financial aid would impact his artistic integrity. It's almost expected that if you pursue an artistic or creative path that you'll struggle financially and you'll be unable to make it big. Many artists don't make it big. They abandon their creative dreams and take a job that will allow them to survive, but they relegate their creative dreams to a hobby. And realistically, that hobby may have to be abandoned and relinquished, putting their instruments in a case and just hoping they can take it out every so often to keep as a hobby. But realistically, that hobby will be abandoned and just pushed aside so that they can focus on their employment, housework, errands, and social life. Eventually, that guitar case is going to get a layer of dust, and it just won't be opened again. I would argue that because of the occurrence of this trope in media and history, many artists who want to pursue art feel that they have to fulfill it, even if not consciously. They justify living in small apartments just with their easel and mattress by saying it's a means of focusing on the art. And even if they don't actively fulfill that trope, many artists feel validated when they fulfill the expectations set upon themselves by their friends, their family, and peers and society. But how does all this tie into grad school? If I were to ask you how are college students portrayed in media, I'd probably get a few different responses. I'd probably get lazy, I'd probably get party animals, I'd probably get poor and broke. But if I were to ask you how grad schools are portrayed, I'd probably get responses like exhausted, stressed, depressed. I'll ignore the whole party animal side of college culture for now. I'm going to focus on that in another project. But it's quite clear there are expectations that grad students will ultimately be poor, stressed, exhausted and depressed. Some people might find that to be a large claim. Regarding poor, there's a reason student discounts are available to grad students, as well as larger reasons I'll get into in a bit. As for the more mental state kind of side of things, I did some research by procrastinating my actual research. Researchers at Indiana University looked into the experiences of grad students and found that, in short, their mental health isn't great. Sources of stress were found to be the inter-role strain, so that being balancing being seen as a student but as also a member of staff, balancing their research studies with teaching responsibilities, an overall lack of support from the institution, and acquiring funding. According to WebMD, burnout is a term used to describe exhaustion caused by constantly feeling swamped due to excessive, prolonged emotional, physical, and mental stress. Burnout can make you feel tired, fatigued, and exhausted. It can make you lose enthusiasm. It can make you have negative feelings towards your work and tasks. It can alienate you from your activities. It can make you more susceptible to the cold and flu by weakening your immune system. Burnout can be caused by unmanageable workloads, unfair treatment in the workplace, confusing work responsibilities, a lack of communication and support, and immense deadline pressure. A 2014 meta-analysis completed at the University of York St. John compiled results from 29 different studies, resulting in a sample size of over 109,000 students. From this analysis, the authors concluded that burnout has a significant negative relationship with academic progression. I titled this chapter Burnout, and it's not just grad students in academia that are susceptible to burnout. Lecturers, instructors, professors are all incredibly susceptible. In 2019, researchers in India's Symbiosis International University performed a study on occupational stress in faculty members. The results of this research showed that faculty members' stress levels are caused by time pressures, a lack of infrastructure, students' indiscipline, and poor pay prospects. I know that studies that discuss these things can kind of come across as a bit cold, and it's difficult to kind of put yourself into a point on a graph, especially with most of these graphs looking like they were made in the 60s and having not changed. So I'd like to offer a personal experience. I've experienced major burnout several times. The worst was during my undergraduate when I had exams and deadlines looming over me, and I had one assignment at the end of the year. Well, I had a lot of assignments at the end of the year. I was a bit of a perfectionist and a workaholic, so I dedicated every single second of my free time to this one specific assignment. The assignment was a performance, and it required a lot of setup. I had to film stuff, edit stuff. I even added subtitles, like manually transcribing them. I didn't have to do any of that. I just wanted this performance to be amazing, and as soon as I gave my performance, my legs kind of just gave way from under me. The next 2 weeks, I was essentially a zombie. You know that feeling when you have an early flight, so you wake up early and you get out of bed and you just want coffee. It was essentially that for like 2 weeks. I was physically weak, I was exhausted, and any task, no matter how small, just required all of my mental energy. Now, that assignment is probably the single best thing I've ever done, and I'm incredibly proud of it. I didn't have anyone forcing me to work hard. I could probably have put in half the effort I did and still gotten a good grade. When I gave that performance, I wanted everyone to think, wow, he really put a lot of work into that. I was working late at night, forgetting to eat, and just not really looking after myself. And looking back now, I notice how I felt validated when I was up all night. I think me of the past actually knew this as well, but thought ruining their mental state was worth it to get a few extra % on an assignment. I had witnessed people in media pulling all-nighters to write a paper. I felt that gratification and validation I described an artist feeling when they can barely afford to survive. The Big Bang Theory is a show I never really made an effort to watch. The show depicts a few grad students living in overly fancy apartments. An article by NPR claims the set designers had looked at real grad student apartments and they had created faithful adaptations for the show. These sets were then scrapped because the network tested the show and just found they were too depressing. I kind of understand the book-riddled desk, the plates left on the floor, and the group of mugs that should have moved a week ago because the mold is going to form some immaculate conception is pretty depressing. TV networks want their shows to be watchable and enjoyable, and seeing a wacky group of friends hang out in what is essentially a cave with a big stack of mugs wouldn't be enjoyable. These depressing sets are the reality for many grad students. It's easier to keep all the books you need within reach, it's easier to get something quick to eat and put the plate on the floor instead of bringing it downstairs to wash it, and caffeine-fueled writing sessions are kind of expected. So while I haven't seen much of The Big Bang Theory, I have watched a lot of The Simpsons. Recently one scene popped into my head from season 16.
Look at me, I'm a grad student. I'm 30 years old and I made $600 last year.
Bernard, don't make fun of grad students. They just made a terrible life choice.
It pokes fun at a few things, mainly that grad students end up staying in grad school a lot longer than they have to, and that they have very little money. Possibly that they have ponytails too, that may be because $600 a year won't stretch to a haircut, and I love this gag like I love much of the older Simpsons. PhD Comics is a series of webcomics, and they're incredibly funny. They mainly focus on the life of PhD students, but they also feature professors and other academic roles. If you're interested in academia, I really recommend you check them out. I'll put a link down below. Personally, I think content like PhD Comics is a great way to view academia in a less polished way than what the institution's marketing material will have you believe. Anyway, back to the trope. As I said before, a word or expression used in a figurative sense and a common or overused theme or device. The fact grad students are portrayed as a metaphorical hermit in a cave where they work away at a mysterious scroll for all eternity while barely scraping a bit of gold is a reality, even if I did just exaggerate it quite a bit. And one might argue that why should grad students expect money? Why can't they just get a job? The reality is that while grants and funding are available in some places, after rent, bills and expenses like a car, there's really not much left. And as for the job, sure, a part-time job could be an option. Some institutions might even let you work there part-time. But the money you earn from that job could put you over the threshold for a grant, and ultimately you would be worse off and have less time. And also, if you're working away on your thesis, or as I called it before, a mysterious scroll, from 9 to 5 every day, your free time is often spent doing stuff you didn't have time to do, like laundry and dishes and just general housework and errands. Grad students have this expectation placed upon themselves by other grad students, institutions, the media, and honestly themselves, that they have to place their studies higher on their list of priorities than sleep and free time. For many grad students, feeling burnt out because you studied for 12 hours straight feels gratifying. They're fulfilling these expectations that were placed upon them. They see the trope in media and they feel that they have to live up to it to be a good student, much like the artist. So for any stressed out grad student who wants someone to point the finger at, I don't really have one. Some might suggest project supervisors or investigators, and depending on your situation you might be right, but my experience with supervisors has been overwhelmingly positive, but I do realize that's not the same for everyone. Supervisors often have additional roles at institutions such as lecturing, and as I mentioned before, lecturers are incredibly stressed out. They're also overworked and often coerced into decisions by the administrators. So it's the administrators, they're the cause. Maybe they set up the practices and guidelines for the institution, but while I think they might be a factor, I don't think they're the root cause. Personally, I think the whole be productive all the time, or what's become known as grind culture, is to blame. Or at least partially. Grind culture involves always being on and available. It doesn't matter if you're at work or not. Grind culture dictates that you should be hustling and reachable. You should be always checking your email even if you're going through a crisis. The New York Times say grind culture is essentially performative workaholicism that's obsessed with striving. And I agree, I'm definitely a workaholic, whether that's my research or a project like this. I have in the script here, he says writing the script just before going to bed. Even if your institution directly combats grind culture, it's possible that the staff there were trained under a similar culture, or even those that train that staff. A sort of cycle of abuse happens. People typically teach others like how they have been taught. Much like those who have children will often raise them how they themselves were raised. If someone was trained to be on 24/7 to succeed, they're going to put that into their work ethic and pass it on to someone else, even subconsciously. But if grind culture is only partly to blame, what else is? Well, we tell students in secondary school who are barely even 18 that they have to decide what they want to do when they're older. And sometimes that student doesn't even get a say. They're forced to get perfect grades, they're forced to attend study groups, as well as sports and music classes, and just the general schoolwork. In that case, I'd blame whoever's forcing that student, even if they believe they have noble intentions. But what about students that don't have overly ambitious parents motivating them? Let's imagine a hypothetical. We have an aspiring med student, and they want to study at prestigious med school. Chances are that our student, especially nowadays, is going to search social media to see what that school is like. That student will be bombarded with influencers who glorify this grind culture in insanely damaging ways. These influencers post 12-hour-long study streams, time-lapses of them pulling all-nighters, unrealistic days in the life. They show off a box of empty pens from taking notes, and their study notes look more like adverts for stationery than actual revision material. Seriously, if you're in a lecture, you're not taking notes like this. You're not having 10 different colours and all these beautiful diagrams. You're most likely taking shorthand and then doing these up after the fact. At least make it look like you've done them after the fact. In my opinion, it's comparable to putting an unrealistic body photo up on Instagram and acting like this one miracle tea will transform you from whatever you are now into this. It is something that is unachievable, and the tea in that metaphor that they're promoting is this grind culture. And for the general person, and I would say for most of the population, grind culture won't take you from whatever you are now to someone who will do 12-hour-long study streams. And if it does, there's going to be consequences, much like how if this tea does give you that body goal, there will be consequences, I'm sure. It's probably not going to be good for your health in the long run. So while this grind culture might be good for you in the short term, it's not going to be sustainable. And we've managed to turn conversations like how much sleep we got into a competition. We've managed to turn how much work did we do into a competition. And I think ultimately we've just tried to turn the very human desire for knowledge into a competition.